The latest season of Wilderness Alone has arrived to much anticipation. This year's $500,000 prize won't be easy to claim, as the competition is set in the northern part of Canada, specifically in the Mackenzie River Delta of the Nunavut region. The first contestant to appear is 36-year-old Isaiah, a forest ranger who deals with illegal poachers and also serves as a captain in the Air National Guard, responsible for rescue operations during major incidents. Isaiah and his wife could not conceive naturally, so they turned to IVF, which, after many failures, drained their finances. Winning the $500,000 would be life-changing for them. Upon landing, Isaiah's first task is to survey his surroundings to determine where to build a shelter and find water and food. The forest, dense with spruce trees and thick underbrush, is not welcoming. Encountering a moose or predator could mean there's no escape. He continues to explore and finds tracks of the largest wolves in the north, nearly 2 meters long and weighing over 100 kilograms. A formidable challenge for any lone human without a weapon. Isaiah's strategy is to build a sturdy shelter to ensure his safety. However, wolves are not his only threat. He also discovers tracks of a grizzly bear with cubs nearby, indicating recent fish-eating activities. The second contestant is 49-year-old William, a fisherman. After surveying the area, he chooses a spot to set up camp but prioritizes fishing over shelter construction, using a net from his 10 allowed pieces of equipment to save time on making one. If he catches fish today, he could gain an early lead. With 30 years of fishing experience, he is confident, though less experienced with bow hunting, which could complicate hunting larger game. However, he's also a skilled hunter, and hopes a win could allow his family to relocate to a quieter coastal town, beneficial for his children. After preparing his fishing net, William starts building a shelter, making sure it's strong due to the many bears in the area. Building is physically demanding, so after feeling exhausted, William decides to take a break and check on his fishing net. He caught a big barracuda. William was about to remove the fish from the net to show it off when the barracuda thrashed wildly and escaped back into the river. Cubby, 34, is a self-sustaining farmer. The death of a friend a few years ago made him realize how fragile human life is. So, he and his wife sold everything they had, bought an RV, and moved to the wilderness. Winning this competition would help pay for his wife's medical treatments and improve their lives. The first thing Cubby did upon arrival was to find a place to build a shelter, knowing the ever-present danger in bear territory. While selecting a site, he encountered a squirrel and impulsively decided to hunt it, but missed and lost a valuable arrow. Regretting his hasty actions, he realized building a shelter was the wiser choice. He gathered some dry wood to use as fuel for boiling water, then constructed a temporary shelter using ropes and a tarp in an open area to spot predators early. Later, he plans to find a better location for a permanent shelter. Dub, 44, is a seasoned wilderness hunter who interacts with nature daily through hunting, trapping, and fishing. For him, joining the competition is just a change of scenery. Being single, he has no marital worries to distract him. If he wins, he plans to pay off the mortgage for himself and his mother. After landing, he spotted a reindeer near the camp, but could not hunt it as it's a protected species. With the cold winters here, he decided to dig into the soil for one wall of his shelter, then cut some trees for the other walls. He didn't want to build a large shelter to conserve fuel in the winter. After setting up the frame, he covered it with a tarp, completed the cabin, and moved his equipment inside. It felt good until a brown bear showed up that night, making for a long, sleepless night as he waited for dawn. The first thing he did the next day was to move, escaping the dangerous spot. On day 2, 34-year-old Michaela, she collected some wild grasses to make a few duck decoys and placed them strategically to attract real ducks. In real life, she is an adventure guide, so hunting and fishing are routine for her. Even catching wolves, a dangerous task, is no big deal for her. Usually, she teaches others these skills, but now she's competing to prove herself. Winning the $500,000 prize could greatly improve her and her husband's life. After setting up the decoys, she planned to place the fishing net in the water to fish automatically. She did not choose hooks or fishing lines, so her future fish meals depended on this net. Wolf tracks on the riverbank were not a good sign. A pack could easily overpower an unarmed person. Although Michaela is an expert at catching wolves, she couldn't help feeling scared. On the second day, Cubby went out to find some food. The ground cranberries were ripe, though sparse, but they helped fill him up a bit. Then he began building a permanent shelter. The presence of predators and large animals made a sturdy shelter especially important. To save materials, he used logs and trap lines to build the roof overhead and a large bed below, making everything very durable since the competition might last several months. He planned to stop for the day and finish up the following day. Jungle policeman Isaiah was already facing a Waterloo moment. He had arrived full of enthusiasm, but quickly realized how much he missed his family, an emotion he had not anticipated. Now he understood why so many contestants faced this situation. However, to prove himself to his daughter, he decided not to give up and went out to find food. After eating a cranberry, his nose began to bleed. The air was humid, so it shouldn't have caused dryness. Now he suspected there was something wrong with the berries. Not wanting to waste time on trivial matters, he hurried to find some protein by fishing in the river, made a fishing rod, tied on a hook and line, and set up fishing traps. On day 3, Mikola went to the river to check on the fishing net, but unexpectedly found bear tracks in the shallow river. The net was not only not fully stretched, but also tangled. This scene reminded her of beavers, hard-working little animals that build their shelters and gather food without complaint. Mikola strongly believes in this spirit, determined to find a way to persevere no matter how tough wilderness life gets. After repairing the fishing net, Mikola put it back in the water to continue catching fish. On her way back, she found a rock that is sacred in Cree culture. She cleaned the rock and prayed devoutly. William built his shelter like a cave. The massive effort left him physically and mentally exhausted. Now he needed to find some food to regain his strength. Nearby, he could find rose hips, but he couldn't eat many because the fine hairs could irritate the intestines. Eating a few berries made him feel much better. At that moment, he was thrilled to find a rabbit trail. Setting a few traps there could provide some protein. He quickly set up a snare using trapline on a stick. Since losing that fish, his mind had been a mess and he couldn't concentrate. Perhaps some protein would improve his situation. After setting the traps, he found a small swamp to see if he could catch fish. There was a shallow area where several small fish were trapped. He took a stick, waded into the water, and simply caught 2 small fish. It was a rare opportunity, so he tried to catch as many as possible. In the end, he caught 5 fish, making him the first contestant to secure protein. On day 4, Mikola was busy praying in the morning but heard wolves howling nearby. Adhering to the principle of not provoking unless provoked, she didn't pay much attention. The first thing she did every morning was to check the fishing net. Now she had to keep adjusting the net's position, hoping to find a deeper spot. On her way back, she even found a kidney, likely dropped by a wolf hunting a squirrel. It smelled fresh, so Mikola decided it was a blessing from heaven to find a kidney in such wild surroundings. She roasted and ate the kidney, enjoying its exceptional flavor. Meanwhile, Cubby decided to postpone building his shelter because he was too hungry. Finding food was his immediate priority. Armed with a bow and arrow, he entered the dense forest. The thick underbrush was difficult to navigate, especially for someone of his size, but he pushed on. Cubby was not interested in small game. He wanted to hunt a 1,000-pound moose. Clearly, this was no easy task. The forest was full of grizzly bears, and competing with them for food was highly dangerous. Soon, he found huge bear paw prints on the ground. Despite knowing the risks ahead, he decided to continue for the chance of finding food. Suddenly, Cubby screamed and fell to the ground. Who could have expected that an arrow would slip from his quiver and stab directly into his thigh, right where the femoral artery is located? If cut, it could be life-threatening. With no rescue available, he had to use a multi-tool to cut open his pant leg, pull the arrow out himself, and then bandage the wound simply. On his way back to camp, the pain and blood loss made him dizzy, forcing him to turn off the camera to reduce weight. The wound was large and deep, beyond what he could manage in the wild, so he had to make a satellite phone call to ask the production team for rescue. Thus, he became the first contestant to withdraw this season. Despite the disappointment, one must not risk life for the sake of the competition. 35-year-old Timber, who had just landed, began to fiddle with his gear. He is a humanitarian aid worker living off the grid with his family. Unlike other contestants, he quickly entered the forest for a special hunt soon after landing. Quietly moving through dense bushes, he reached the river and found prints of grizzly bears and moose. Since grizzly bears prefer unobstructed runways, they generally move along riverbanks or in open woodlands. Thus, Timber returned to the dense bushes. He spotted a squirrel on a tree, quickly drew his bow, and shot it dead, becoming the first contestant to secure a mammal. The squirrel's meat could not only be eaten but also used as bait for fishing. A double benefit. Acting immediately, he set several fishing traps by the river. While waiting, he couldn't idle and hurried to build a shelter. To save time, he intended to construct a temporary shelter first, then a sturdy cabin. After finishing the shelter, he quickly returned to the river to check on the fishing. The result was excellent. He caught a large spindlefish, making him one of the rare contestants to enjoy a full meal on the first day. Sarah, 49, was the first contestant to cry upon landing. Before marriage, she was a vegetarian against hunting. After marrying a husband who loves the outdoors, she too fell in love with this lifestyle. Winning the $500,000 prize would allow them to retire comfortably. After finding a suitable campsite, Sarah set up a simple tent. Once settled, she searched nearby for berries or porcini mushrooms. Berries were easy to find but not filling. To win, she needed to eat well and store food before the snow. Fortunately, Sarah not only found berries but also some mushrooms. Exploring further, she discovered a small lake nearby, ideal for fishing later. Surprisingly, she also spotted a beaver. Catching it would provide protein and fat. Unfortunately, she had no bow and arrow, so she could only watch the beaver swim. Still, it was reassuring to know there was food around. Dusty, 36, planned to build a shelter in dense woods to avoid strong winds. He is a welder who spends his free time hunting, fishing, and playing survival games outdoors. This was his first time near the Arctic Circle, but Dusty was not scared. Winning could improve his family's life and let him earn money from his hobby, a rare opportunity. For long-term survival, a sturdy shelter was essential. He chopped down 2 trees for the main supports, installed a crossbeam, and set other trees at an angle on top. His shelter was the sturdiest among the contestants. Covering it with a waterproof tarp would make it a solid residence. By day 2, Peter, 42, initially disoriented upon landing, he felt better now, but extremely thirsty from not drinking water. He planned to find water first, then build a shelter. His wife had advised him not to drink raw water, but to boil it first. The area was very damp, making it hard to use flint. After scraping a magnesium stick for a long time, he still couldn't start a fire. Dehydration could occur if he went 24 hours without water, so he needed to find a way to get water into his system. He had to find some tinder. Peter, a librarian and intellectual who loves outdoor activities and is a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, mostly gained his wilderness knowledge from books, which he then practiced to turn into skills. After some exploration, he found a small pond in an area with about 14,000 such small lakes. While Peter was going back to fetch water, he suddenly discovered a pile of bear feces. Although it was not fresh, Peter decided not to build a permanent shelter nearby, as it would be difficult to defeat a bear without a fire stick. After finding tinder, he successfully drank water. On the second day, Dusty went out to look for food, but only found some rose hips. Although they weren't very fleshy, they were better than nothing. He collected some for emergencies. During this time, he could always hear squirrels chirping in the forest. So, he returned to the camp to get a snare line and set a noose trap. While he was out looking for firewood to boil water, a squirrel entered the camp. He quickly took out his bow and arrow. Getting food was significant for the contestants as it not only filled their stomachs but also boosted their confidence. He skinned the squirrel and cooked it directly in the pot, which was enough for Dusty's meal. Sarah built a cone-shaped tent for herself, a structure used by nomadic tribes for thousands of years for its simplicity and material efficiency. The location of her shelter was also good, with a lake in front and dense bushes behind. After finishing the construction, she went to challenge the beavers. If she could get one, she could eat for at least 2 weeks. After sitting by the lake for a while, the prey finally appeared. When it swam close, Sarah decisively shot an arrow, hitting the target. Although it seemed she had hit it, the beaver escaped into the water, and the actual situation was unknown. After a fierce mental struggle, Sarah decided to go into the water to retrieve it. The obvious risk was hypothermia from the low body temperature, which could be fatal. As she shakily entered the water and picked up the arrow, her heart sank because there was nothing on it. This was undoubtedly disappointing, but there was nothing she could do but accept it. Now she could only look for another opportunity to encounter the beaver again. On the third day, 42-year-old Jake, a falconer who specializes in falconry, was taught everything about the wilderness by his father. Now he is proficient in hunting, fishing, and setting traps. However, he was a bit unlucky as he lost his fish hooks and lines right after arriving, likely when the side zipper of his backpack was scratched while walking through the bushes. He has been looking for them for days but found nothing. Now, he had to weave a gill net from parachute cord, otherwise, he wouldn't even have a chance to catch fish. After finishing the net, he immediately put it in the water, but whether it could catch fish remained to be seen. Today, Peter began to fervently build infrastructure. As a refined man, he insists on peeling the bark from the wood used for his bed to give it a clean, pale appearance. Using the bed as a foundation, he started to construct the roof. He inserted one end of soft willow branches into the ground and bent them into an arch to rest on the framework. This formed the circular roof of the shelter, a design commonly used by the indigenous people of the region for its simplicity and aesthetic appeal, resembling a large steamed bun. All contestants are in a hurry to build their shelters because it will snow here in a week. Without a decent house, it's almost like forfeiting the competition. By the fourth day, it took Jake an hour and a half to make a fire since he was the only contestant this season who did not bring a flint. Originally, he wanted to bring an extra piece of equipment, but ended up losing his fishing hooks and lines, which was ironically funny. Starting a fire without flint is time-consuming and laborious, but Jake knew an ancient method to easily create a fire. He burned some rotten dry wood to make charcoal, used birch bark to craft a container, and crushed the charcoal inside it. Then he made a sealed lid for the container. His belt was metallic, and he could find quartz nearby. Striking them together would spark and ignite the charcoal. When not in use, he would cover it with the lid to extinguish the charcoal. After solving the fire issue, he went to check his fishing net by the river. As expected, there were no fish, but he suddenly heard a beaver slapping the water. He broke off a small branch and placed it by the water to lure the beaver within bow range, then hid nearby. Today, Timber had a sudden idea to use his waterproof quiver as a water bottle. With portable water, he could travel farther to search for food, but he needed to make another quiver for himself. Resources were limited in this area, so he needed to use his imagination fully. He took a piece of leather from the original quiver and cut it into 2 rectangles. He then folded them and punched through 2 symmetrical holes. The leather needed to be tied to a wooden frame using trapline. He made 2 such frames to bind on both ends of the bow, allowing him to carry 4 arrows at once, which was sufficient. After that, he went to the riverbank in search of his favored prey. The area was full of various animal tracks, exciting Timber greatly. He was also lucky to find a pathway where a moose came to drink. Hunting such a large prey would undoubtedly lay a solid foundation for winning the competition. He followed the path into the forest, crossed the area, and entered a large swamp. Moose love such places. Inside, he found a concealed spot and started imitating the moose call. Surprisingly, he managed to call a male moose. To get the best position, he slowly moved while using the call to attract the moose closer. During this time, he made sure to stay downwind. He slowly adjusted his position, luring the moose within bow range. Timber's adrenaline surged, his blood boiled. Because of this, his first arrow missed. Fortunately, the moose didn't run far. He had another chance. With the second arrow, he was closer, but a small bush blocked the shot. The moose disappeared. A great opportunity missed, hitting Timber hard. He needed to calm his emotions to continue in the competition. On the third day of the competition, Isaiah found a wild gas canister on the first day but didn't convert it into a stove. Instead, he used it as a urinal, allowing him to stay inside during the cold nights. As the weather got colder, the simple tent was no longer sufficient. So, today's task was to build a super shelter to withstand the cold. He decided to build a semi-subterranean house. There was a dry ditch nearby where he could dig a pit, which was the most physically demanding task. He had to slow down and control the pace to conserve calories. He made sure to rest properly to avoid exhausting himself. On the fourth day, Dub made a narrow and small fishing net. He found a perfect spot by the river, placed it in the water, and started fishing automatically. After a close encounter with a bear, he quickly moved and rebuilt his shelter. Now fully prepared, he focused on finding food. He had been surviving on berries and mushrooms, so he urgently needed some protein. Besides setting up the fishing net, he also started fishing by the river, confident in his fishing skills from years of wilderness experience. While focused on fishing, a duck flew by. He quickly grabbed his bow and arrow and imitated the duck's call, hoping it would come closer. Perhaps because of this, the prey did not land near him. Another duck had quietly swum over. Dub felt a secret thrill, and his arrow shot into the water. Since arrows are precious, he had to dive within 2 minutes to retrieve it. The water felt ice cold, but fortunately, he successfully recovered the arrow. Now, he had to continue fishing and hope to catch some protein. On the 5th day, Dusty had completed his shelter and even made a table. While admiring his work, he heard a squirrel's call. He couldn't pass up the chance for fat meat and quickly chased after it with his bow and arrow. His first shot missed, but luckily run far. Dusty's second arrow was successful. After the hunt, he had food. He hoped eating the squirrel would help and planned to barbecue it later, saving the hide for warm clothing. Michaela camouflaged herself with weeds, but it proved ineffective. She struggled to find a good spot for her fishing net. Without ducks or fish, she temporarily went to the forest to look for berries to stave off hunger. Surprisingly, not only did she find berries, but she also discovered a bunch of cow parsnip. Its roots were edible and had medicinal value. She dug it out of the mud, collected a handful of roots, and picked some berries, making a meal no problem. After landing, Peter hadn't found any food. He made a wooden decoy and set up a precious high-tone hook. Its fishing capability was strong, so each contestant was only allowed 3. After preparing everything, he started fishing by the river. Unexpectedly, he got a nibble soon after, boosting his confidence. About half an hour later, he finally caught a big barracuda. On day 6, Dub's first task each morning was to check his fishing net. Today, as he arrived at the river, he found a bird perched on his net. Taking it as a good sign, he hoped there might be fish caught in the net. Indeed, his small net had caught a large barracuda, enough to sustain him for several days. He cleaned the fish and cooked half of it right away, providing about 2,400 calories. From past experiences in wilderness survival, storing food wasn't the wisest move due to risks of theft or spoilage. Dub's strategy was to eat it quickly for safety. After 6 days without protein, the meal was incredibly satisfying. Isaiah continued to work hard on building his shelter. After digging the foundation pit, he cut several trees for the corners, dug holes, and secured them to ensure the structure was sturdy enough to stand in. He aimed to make the shelter very durable to maximize insulation. However, this required ample food to avoid the risk of being forced out of the competition due to exhaustion. Just then, a squirrel appeared, and Isaiah paused his work to chase it with his bow and arrow. His shot was successful, and he cooked the squirrel, using inedible parts as fish bait. After eating the meat and drinking the broth, he checked the river again and caught another large barracuda. It seemed impossible to starve with such luck. Peter also made a fishing net since protein was crucial here. He planned to use both fishing and seine nets, hoping to store some food while attending to other tasks. Surprisingly, like having a lucky streak, both the net and hook kept catching fish. Later, he caught 2 more large barracudas. He couldn't eat it all at once and planned to smoke it for long-term preservation. He built a conical frame with thin branches, then placed the fish meat in the middle and wrapped it with moss. After smoking the moisture out of the fish, it could be preserved for a long time. By day 7, William's recent efforts paid off. Today he checked the rabbit trap he had set earlier, hoping to catch some red meat. After waiting several days, he actually caught one, likely the largest mammal captured by any contestant so far. Its meat would feed William for 2 meals. In contrast, Michaela wasn't as fortunate. She subsisted on berries and completed her shelter. Her breakfast was berries and cow parsley. The latter tasted quite unpleasant. After eating, she went to check her fishing net by the river. In such a place, survival without protein intake was impossible, so she needed to catch fish or hunt other animals. Persistent effort and daily adjustments of the fishing net finally paid off. But while processing the fish, she suddenly felt nauseous, a feeling that intensified, turning her stomach. Eventually, she stood up and vomited into the river, a bright red substance, not blood but the cranberries she had eaten in the morning. The vomiting was likely due to eating cow parsley. After recovering, she quickly returned to processing the barracuda. First, she cut off the fish head to make a soup, then segmented the rest of the fish meat, trying to preserve it for the next meal. With this protein, she could continue competing. By day 8, Peter, having stored a large amount of food, was constantly fearful of bears. So today, he decided to build a ladder to hide his food up high. While cutting wood, he accidentally injured his finger. However, this minor injury could not stop him from continuing his work. He went to the river where one fish had escaped from his hook, and the second and third fishing lines were empty. This plummeted his spirits. He returned to camp, frustrated and annoyed. Despite having a stomach full of fish and 4 spare ones, his mood was terribly low, a potentially dangerous mindset. Then, in a decision no one could understand, he picked up the phone and called the production team, announcing his official withdrawal from the competition. By the 8th day of the competition, 8 contestants remained. Dusty has been fishing for the past 2 days, but with little success. Today he couldn't stand it anymore and decided to wash it thoroughly in the cold river water. He used some horsetail fern as shampoo and cleaned his hair and another hairy area thoroughly. After cleaning up, he hurried back to fishing because food is essential for survival. There was a barracuda, which he quickly took back to camp to cook. Meanwhile, William has been busy building his shelter. Although small, it's quite comfortable. Now, he needs to collect some mud from the river to construct a smokehouse, as winter is approaching and he will need to keep warm. His wooden house is prone to fire, so he built a fireplace out of stones and mud. Suddenly, he heard the sound of flapping wings outside. He fashioned a noose from trap line at the end of a slim stick and set out to catch a bird that had just run past. Surprisingly, the area was abundant with grouse, and he managed to catch one that landed on a tree, proving his incredible luck. He found a cool cave to store food, and armed with his trap stick, he caught a second grouse. On day 9, Sarah hadn't caught any game recently and had to eat berries to stave off hunger. Today, she was strengthening her shelter with fallen leaves when an owl flew by. They believed this animal could bring good luck and guide hunters to their prey. However, capturing animals was too difficult, so she decided to look for edible plants to regain some strength. Her target for the day was astragalus. Its roots are rich in carbohydrates and have medicinal values. In the wild, surviving without protein is not feasible. She headed to the swamp to look for some beavers. On her way, she heard the sound of a breaking branch and spotted a grouse. Quickly, she drew her bow and shot, hitting her target perfectly and finally securing some protein. She cleaned the game by the water. Although the meat wasn't plentiful, mixed with berries and plants, it would last for several meals. The innards could also be used as bait for fishing. If lucky, this could sustain her food cycle. Today's meal was the most abundant since the start of the competition, featuring both vegetables and meat, leaving Sarah very satisfied. In the past 2 days, Dusty built a conical smokehouse. Although he didn't have much food, having such a structure was a precaution. Besides smoking meat, it could be used to dry wet wood. Being out for so long made him homesick, so he kept busy to distract himself. After finishing the smokehouse, he went hunting. There were plenty of wild animals nearby, and he easily got his first grouse. While processing the grouse, he kept some feathers to make arrows. After cleaning the grouse, he cooked it. Suddenly, he remembered the water he drank came from an upstream pond. If it contained beavers, he might be infected with giardia, causing stomach pain. His pain had evolved from mild to severe, and he also felt dizzy and nauseous. By day 10, Dusty endured a painful night without relief. Concerned about continuing in such a state, he tried eating some grouse meat to ease the pain, but it didn't help. He went for a walk to see if exercise might improve his condition. Neither eating nor exercising helped, and with no other options, he reluctantly picked up the phone to officially withdraw from the competition. Although it's unfortunate, it's not worth losing your life for a competition. It's a pity that the well-built shelter was only occupied for a few days before the end. Over to Sarah. Her mood has greatly improved since she got some protein. Today, she plans to capitalize on this by using the grouse's innards to catch some fish. Before setting off, she needs to make an old-fashioned gorge hook. She doesn't use fishing line because it can easily break. Once baited, it sinks to the bottom, usually catching big fish. Under certain conditions, it can even be more effective than modern hooks. Since gorge hooks are cheap, Sarah made 9 at once for automatic fishing. Losing one wouldn't be a big deal. With her tools ready, she planned to try her luck at the water. Unexpectedly, the well-hidden innards were gone, probably stolen by a clever raven, which was infuriating yet unavoidable. With no choice, she had to postpone fishing to try hunting another grouse, though it wasn't easy. Fortunately, she stumbled upon a large patch of morel mushrooms, abundant and of high quality, which seemed like a stroke of luck. On day 11, William had been living comfortably thanks to plentiful food. He finally had time